All right, we're recording. So, good evening, everybody. I'm Nicole Sackage, and I'm here with Grant Cameron tonight. And he and I are just going to kind of have a conversation back and forth about some of the hot topics that have been across Facebook and the Twitterverse over the last few days. And hi, Grant, how are you tonight?
Just fine. It's an exciting time. I figured we should maybe get together and get me while this stuff is still new, because a lot of people, I actually got where this started. We're going to talk a little bit about this Israeli story, and I can give you the background of how this started, because I think you were working yesterday when this all broke loose. And
Yeah.
that was, I got an email from Sid Goldberg, a friend of mine. He's from Toronto. He's a senior producer at Gaia. And he said, I got this story that we're doing a news section or some sort of thing about news or whatever. Can this guy talk to you tomorrow on Zoom just for a couple minutes about this Israeli story? And I'm thinking, wow, man, I thought it was like a QAnon rabbit bunny story, or Easter bunny story. And so I really didn't, I was going to tell him, nah, I don't know anything about this stupid story. I had sort of seen the story, didn't really take it all that seriously. And then I saw he had attached the Jerusalem Post article to it. And I went, Jerusalem Post has covered this article about this Israeli guy. So that's why I decided I would follow the story. So I contacted all our friends, Bob, McGuire, and I contacted a couple of people who are dealing with Pandolfi. And I said, ask Pandolfi, what's he say about all this kind of stuff? And so I went through the list. And then I suddenly realized I had a tape. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But I think you first wanted to know about the Rogan show and the Jacques Vallee, which I knew a little bit about that some people don't know. So in that one, you wanted to know about some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Jacques Vallee spent a lot of time talking about a guy by the name of Arthur Lundahl. Now, I knew who Arthur Lundahl was. A lot of people don't, because this goes back many, many years. There's been three, what they call the head of the weird desks at the CIA, like the guys that handle all the paranormal, the UFO stuff. The guy that's there, and maybe it's changed, but as rumor goes, it's Ron Pandolfi who runs it now. And that was from 1983 on. Before 1983, back to 1970, was Kit Green, who we'll talk about again tonight. And the guy before him was Arthur Lundahl. So Art Lundahl was brought in. He was a photographic expert. He's the guy that actually developed the technology that is used in satellites to reassemble and use computers to, so you can take photographs from outer space and zoom in to read license plates and stuff. He was behind all that technology, and he ran the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which analyzed all the U-2 SR-71 and the spy photographs.
And so, this is who Vallee was talking about during the JRE, when he was talking about this person could see the snow accumulation on the statue in Red Square, things like that. So
So this guy, if you read Jacques Vallee's third and fourth volume of his Forbidden Sciences, you'll see he talks an awful lot about Art Lundahl. He had a lot of meetings with Art Lundahl. And Art Lundahl was sort of like Pandolfi and sort of like more like Kit Green, where he would sort of, what they call them is open employees. So they're not like a spy guy that everything's secret. They're sort of interacting with the public, and they can openly talk about UFOs anytime they want. So Art Lundahl was dealing with a lot of people in the UFO community during that period. And I actually had a file on him. I'd gathered material from various people's files. Like James McDonald was one of the ones that that he was dealing with, and he was a famous researcher in Tucson, Arizona, a doctor there, professor at University of Arizona. And I gathered all this material, and actually at one point, Hal Putoff asked me, I hear you got a collection of stuff on Art Lundahl. And I said, yeah. And he says, could I get it? So I photocopied all these letters and stuff from Art Lundahl from various different categories. So I've got a big file on him. But he was talking about Lundahl, and he started to dance around this piece that he had talked about, this 1952 piece that was over Washington, D.C. And Rogan kept asking about it. And he kept not really wanting to sort of answer the question. And then James Fox got in on it. And I'm thinking, like, why is he sort of dancing around this question of, and the thing is, I've got a file on this. The piece actually, I think it did come to Canada. The Canadians definitely talked about it. The head of the Canadian study talked about it. And I actually put on my Facebook, I actually put on a page of a letter from Admiral Knowles, who was on the Nightcap board. That was the biggest UFO group in the world at the time in the United States. He was on the board, and he actually was the one who helped get the Betty and Barney Hill story out. And he also dealt with a case with Francis Swan. He lived next door to a woman by the name of Francis Swan. And you'll see Kathy Martin talks about her. She was very important because she was a main contact to the Canadians. The Canadians were using her to deal with an AFA by the name of an alien by the name of AFA. And Francis Swan was like a channeler. She was the last of the 1950 blonde contactees. And then when Betty and Barney Hill came along, then suddenly the Greys came on the scene. And the idea of the tall whites and all these people, they all just sort of disappeared. Or they had 50 contactees. So Knowles had written this letter, and he actually drew the piece and what the piece looked like. And Wilbur Smith talked about this piece a couple of times. The fact that, and the way Wilbur Smith described it is that it wasn't really a flying saucer. It was a 2-foot object that was this piece came off of. And so it would today would be described as an orb. And so there's a lot of these stories that go back that link in to this whole idea about the 52 piece. And the other thing that Vallee left out that I can sort of add was that there was a guy inside the CIA that was good friends with Art Lundahl, who actually, he's the guy that found the piece. It actually landed on his property, and he actually wrote a book. Now the name of the book has escaped me, but he actually wrote a whole book about this piece that he had recovered. And so Lundahl was pretty open about this kind of stuff. And the other interesting story I can tell about Lundahl is you'd asked me whether Jacques Vallee had, I'd provided Jacques Vallee. I knew they were doing the metal stuff. So somebody asked me, can I provide my Canadian material for Jacques Vallee? So that's what I did, because I have all the Canadian files from Wilbur Smith. All that stuff was photographed. I got his entire collection, which is probably 10,000 pages of material. It's at the University of Ottawa, but nobody's ever going to go there. So I've got the entire collection. And in there's a lot of, the Canadians dealt with an awful lot of crash saucer material. Wilbur Smith's son, we actually have an audio tape with his son. I interviewed him, a couple of people interviewed him. And his son actually said he remembered, he was about 17 at the time, because Wilbur died in 62. But he said he remembered in the 1950s, blue military cars pulling up, guys getting out with pieces that were coming from the United States. So the US Air Force and the intelligence people in the United States were sending pieces of metal to Wilbur Smith to analyze. And the guy who did the analysis actually lived here in Manitoba where I was, so I got to know him. And at one point I asked him, his name was Art Bridge, he's long dead now. But I said to Art, Art, how much material did you and Wilbur actually deal with? And he said, tons of it. So they had a lot of material they were dealing with. And there was actually a guy from Ohio who actually talked about going there just before Wilbur died. He's dying of stomach cancer. So he knew he was dying, and he started to really talk at the very end. And this guy from Ohio talked to him just before he died. And Wilbur was telling him about guys with suitcases chained to their arms coming from the United States with these pieces for Wilbur to analyze and stuff like that. So Wilbur was a very top guy. He was what's called the head of Radio Ottawa in Canada, which would be like the equivalent of the NSA. So he controlled all the communication frequencies that were used for FM, AM, and all the spy, because at that time all the stuff was being done by radio. So Wilbur had this very high security clearance, and he was very interested in UFOs. And the last thing I'll mention about Art Lundahl, and then you can sort of ask a question if you want. You asked me what Vallee had provided for me. The one document he did give me is and I'm going to produce this in I'm doing this book called The Alien Documents. And in there, I produced this one document, and it's a memo that was written by Art Lundahl. And it deals with a 1959 incident, July of 1959, at the National Photographic Interpretation Center. And what happens is this Francis Swan, who lived down the street from Betty and Barney Hill, who was the channeler of this AFA alien in the 1950s, Knowles got her going. And then what happened was in 1954, the Navy intelligence, two guys went to see her. And that's what they're doing now. Like they're dealing with the experiencers. So they go to the experiencer and they say, you know, how do you make the contact? Because the government is trying to make contact as well. So these two Navy intelligence guys went to Francis Swan in 1954, and they started to build a file. And there's a file in Navy intelligence. I filed an FOIA. I could not get the file, but there's many references to the fact that the Navy was the one that had the file on her. So in 1959, these two agents from naval intelligence go back to Elliott, Maine, where she lives. And at that point, she says to the one guy, she said, well, why are you just looking at me? Why don't I just teach you how to do it? And he sits in the chair and she puts her hand on his right shoulder, and he starts this automatic writing thing, which is how she started. She started with sort of a tone coming in her ear and this automatic writing, and she could later progress to the fact that she didn't need to do automatic writing. She could actually just tune in, and she could pick up whatever AFA was telling her. So this guy starts this automatic writing stuff, and then he's all excited, and these two naval intelligence guys go racing back to Washington, D.C., and they go to Art Lundahl, because Art Lundahl is the UFO guy. And they go to them at the CIA, and the one guy was actually connected to the CIA. I think, what was his name? Nisham, I think was the guy's name. So he went there, and then Art said, oh, really? You know how to do this? Okay, sit down. Let's talk to the alien. So they're in the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which is a very high secure building in the CIA. It was one of the most top secret buildings in the CIA. Actually, it was in the lowest area of Washington, D.C. And the reason they put it there was because it was such a high secure building where they were analyzing the U-2 and SR-71 photos that the Russians would never look to be in the slums of Washington to find this building. And it was on top of a garage, a car garage. And apparently the people down the street used to think they were making money there. This is the U.S. Mint, that they were making money because there was such high security around this building. And they couldn't figure out, why is there high security around this building in the middle of this slum? So they went in there and they sat down in the room. And if you actually go in, there's a documentary, it was called UFOs Past, Present, Future. But if you go to the remake that Jacques Vallee was actually helping narrate some parts on, it's called UFOs It Has Begun. It was reproduced in 1979. They put it out again. This is a leak, a bunch of leaked documents, videos, stuff that were given to Bob Emenegger and Alan Sandler. They put this documentary, and then they re-released the documentary in 1979 with all this UFO material in it from the government. And in that documentary, you actually have Art Lundahl had gone. He wanted this in the documentary. And so Emenegger told me, he said to Art, he said, okay, well, can you go on camera and tell the story? And then Lundahl said, no, I can't go on camera. And he said, well, why not? Tell the story. You want the story in there? Tell the story. He said, I'm on duty. No, I can't tell the story. So what they do is they take Robert Friend, who was the head of Blue Book, and Robert Friend goes on camera. You'll see this in the 1979 thing, where Robert Friend tells the story, and he's in the room, this National Photographic Train. By then, the building had been shut down. They were just about to tear the building down. So Robert Friend tells a story. So they sit this guy down in the chair, and Art Lundahl runs this meeting. And he said, okay, so get in communication. And the guy starts having this communication, and they start asking, AFA comes, and he's talking through this guy, and he's talking sort of in this voice. And first he's in automatic writing, then he goes to voice. And Art's saying, you know, do you favor a favorite race? And no, and they're asking all these questions about how far is Jupiter and all these tough technical questions. And the guy's answering all these questions. And then at one point, Arthur Lundahl says, we'd like to have some proof. And then AFA said, well, what do you want? We'd like you to show yourself. And this, you got to remember, Robert Friend is telling the story. The head of Blue Book is standing in this room telling the story. We'd like you to show yourself. And then he said, when? And then Art Lundahl says, now. And then he said, go to the window. And I've already raced us to the window, and they look up over the Capitol, and here's this flying saucer in the middle of the day goes flying by the window. And so Art Lundahl is just floored by this. It's like, holy cow. And he calls, and so he has this top secret emergency meeting. He contacts Robert Friend from Wright-Patterson, and he said, man, you got to come here. You got to come here. We got something for you. And so he flies to Washington 2 days later. I think the actual encounter occurred on the 7th. And I think Friend got there on the 9th. They set this meeting. They sit the guy down on the chair again, and they say, okay, get back in contact. And so they're talking to this alien again, and Friend is sitting there watching this. And Robert Friend said it was the most impressive thing he'd ever seen in all his days in Blue Book. This guy's Adam's apple was bouncing up and down. He said there was no doubt this guy, there's something weird was going on. This guy was talking to somebody. And then they asked him, "We'd like you to show yourself." And then he said the time is not right. So this whole memo, and there's a sort of a controversy. It's the old deal, you can't release the real memo. So what happened was there's a handwritten copy. Now the handwritten copy, the story that's told to me was that it was done either by J. Allen Hynek or it was done by Robert Friend back at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. One of the stories I heard was Hynek saw this document on the desk, is a CIA memo from Art Lundahl, and he recopied it by hand. So this document's about 14 pages handwritten. So when I put the story out about Art Lundahl and the channeling of the AFA, I got an email from Jacques Vallee, and he said, "Oh, you got the story, so here's the document." So I've from time to time I've sort of showed the document. I'm going to put it in this alien document book. But this is the thing that Jacques Vallee knew a lot of these guys, and he had a lot of meetings with Art Lundahl in the years that Art Lundahl was there. And Art Lundahl was very clear. I mean, he wanted to talk to people, and he didn't indicate that he knew all sorts of really secret stuff. It was a big mystery. He was very interested in it. And so Vallee was the one. And one of the stories was this that Lundahl would tell would be this story about Francis Swan, this amazing story of this woman. And Friend actually went back to Wright-Patterson. He talked to a general. He tells the story. He goes back to this general at Wright-Patterson. He said, "We got to check this woman. This is the real, there's something going on here. This is the real deal." And he said, the general said, "Another agency is in charge. Get your hands off." And that's when Friend said he didn't know what happened after that. He was told to back off. So I guess the CIA or the Navy intelligence was running the story. And the guy who was actually doing the channeling actually went back to Francis Swan. This would be in the 1980s. And he said, "I can't get rid of them. They're here. You got to get rid of them." I can't. She said, I told you not to deal with the Greys. You wouldn't listen to me. And now you come back for help and you deserve this. And I had a correspondence with her before she died, and she actually confirmed, yes, this had happened. This guy had come back, and the beings were around him all the time. He couldn't get rid of them, and he wanted her to get rid of these beings. But an incredible story where you get these high-level intelligence people that are basically trying to figure out the story. And Jacques Vallee knew him very well. He was having meetings with them. He was having a lot of meetings with Kit Green and with Lundahl. But the two big stories that Lundahl would tell is this piece of the metal, this 52 piece that was recovered by the CIA, and it was in a safe. The guy had it in a safe, and only he had the combination to the safe, and the piece disappeared. So that's how the story ended. But there's a book. The name of the book escapes me, but there was an entire book this guy wrote about this, about finding the piece and working for the CIA and stuff like that.
Right. And I think they speculated in the JRE interview that this piece has somehow become the property of the Department of Energy, or perhaps Battelle, who has looked into different materials over the years. So
yeah, well, the Battelle thing, I think, is a thing where everybody always forgets. Everybody thinks there's one agency that's sort of running the thing, and there may be somebody up in the top who's got all the pieces put together. But basically, you always heard this thing that there was this one hospital that dealt with the bodies in New Mexico, and Battelle handled the metal. Because there's another story that's told about, I don't know if you remember, there's a story told about the memory metal, that there was a researcher who actually found two reports done on memory metals, 1948, 1949. I think the second version is the third version of this thing, and basically talked about nitinol, this nickel and titanium mixture that made this memory metal. You could put it in water and it would heat up and it would change its shape, and then you'd put it back, and when it cooled down, it would go back to its shape. So this is this idea of the Roswell piece going to Battelle outside of Dayton, Ohio. So that's what people got to remember, is that it's not all going to be in one place. So Battelle may be handling the metal, Wright-Patterson is handling the back engineering, or now it'd be Lockheed. And that's where you always hear about Tom DeLonge or these, Jim Semivan and people talking about this stovepiping thing, where you have these different agencies all are involved and nobody's talking to each other, and they're trying to get it out in the open so that people can correspond and interact with each other. And that would be the thing, is that, people are talking about this, we should have disclosure made. And what you got to remember is that it's very competitive inside agencies. So if you've got an agency that has controlled this since 1947, and they're walking around with suitcases full of money, and they can do whatever they want, and they, they get a big suitcase full of money for a Christmas bonus or whatever. I mean, they're not about to let go of what they've got, because what you got to remember is even the people in the UFO community that are working on this, the high level people, you can see all these people have patents. So there are patents involved. So if you're not going to let everybody else in on it, if you can control the secret and you can control the technology, you've got time to get the patents. But if you put it out in the open, well, then it's free for all for anybody to come along. So it always comes down to this rule of money, money, money. Number one rule is money. Second rule is money. Third rule is money and patents. And so that's when you get Barack Obama come out, and George Bush did the same thing, where Barack Obama just went public, where he talked about the fact that he did look, and he believed that he was not withheld. There was no material withheld from him. And of course, immediately they said, okay, what about the UFO thing? And he said, he basically indicated, no, it wasn't withheld, but it was very hard to get it out of the bowels of an agency, which I think, I may be wrong, but I think James Fox interviewed Podesta, and Podesta used almost the same words about secrets in the bowels of these agencies, deep in that is very hard to get it out of these big agencies. And Barack Obama talked about that, but then Barack Obama said, I'm not going to talk about it, which would indicate to me that whoever's got the secret, they firmly believe that it is legally classified, and they're not about to release it. They don't care if you're interested, if the Senate's interested, whoever thinks they're interested, they could not care less. They believe it's legally classified, and they're not going to release it.
Right. Which, we talk about in our disclosure discussions all the time, is this might truly be in the hands of corporations outside of this oversight that our president would naturally have. So this is that slippery slope of how did we even deem it in that first panel? Illegal legalities or illegal legalities. Yeah, I can't say it. It's a tongue twister, but
yeah,
I've always diving into.
Yeah, I've always said during the years, I said, because I always had this thing where I would go to the presidential libraries and I would not see I'd read people's letters. You think this guy's a bad guy, this guy's a bad guy. And then when you read their letters, they just seem like ordinary guys. And then I'm starting to think, if this thing was really completely illegal, someone would defect. And there's been 14 administrations. Now the 15th administration is coming in since the UFO thing started. And everybody's doing the same thing, which would indicate that the people who hold the secret actually firmly believe that it is legally classified. Otherwise, someone would defect. Somebody would move the thing out into the public. But Barack Obama indicates that he knows, the same as when they asked Jimmy Kimmel asked Bush, and Bush said, I ain't saying nothing. He indicated that he knew, I ain't saying nothing. And so that's this idea that the president may have access to it, but he believes it's legally classified, and we're not going to release it no matter what anybody says.
Well, and you just ran down the list of Art Lundahl, then Kit Green and Ron Pandolfi. Kit Green, in the vein of these high ups, turning to people in the community, like you said, experiencers. A few months ago, it was back this summer, we had a back and forth with Joe Merja about the Kit Green tape that you have, and I think we're going to play a little bit of it here tonight. And, he was also working with these super intuitives as well. So, I mean, this is also a theme that, our government keeps saying we don't know what's going on, or they won't give us a direct answer of where they are looking for answers. But then here you go. Art Lundahl was looking into this. Fast forward a few decades later, we have Kit Green, who's speaking with Kay Randall May in this recording that you're going to play. And then, we can only supersede, to now. And if it's Pandolfi that's on the weird desk, who is he turning to? Where's he getting his intuitive answers? And this does kind of segue into the Israeli story, because they talk about, the Galactic Federation. And then if you do your homework on the Galactic Federation, it's come up a few times in our history, and ding, Kit Green's in the middle of the Galactic Federation statements too. So round that for us out, Grant, or if you want to play, it's only 4 minutes. If you want to play a couple minutes, that's okay.
I'll play the last part of it, and just to let you know that I'll have it led for your channel. You can post the entire 45 minutes. I mean, people say don't post it, but I think all we're doing is eliminating the 5 people who haven't heard the tape. I think most people have heard the tape. In fact, as I pointed out, I had the tape, and I'll sort of give you the background of how I got the tape. Joe Mercia hasn't really described, and I think I know where he got it from, because I think one of the places I got it was the same place I'm pretty sure he got it from.
Mhm.
And he's talking about a high-level official who was hammering, saying bad things about Puthoff and who else was the other one? Puthoff and Davis, and yeah, and there's only one person who does that. So, and I think that's basically the source. So what happened was there's a guy by the name of Ryan. Don't 100% quote me on this, but there's a guy by the name of Ryan had attached this email, had attached this tape to an email, and it was addressed to me. It was addressed to Ron Pandolfi, and it was addressed to a guy who was in the White House. He wasn't there very long, and he didn't have a very high position. But this guy's name kept appearing on there. And you get on these lists every once in a while where there's a bunch of high-level names and people are talking, and you'll get on one where Kit Green and Pandolfi and all these, Sarfati's on there. And then from time to time, I say too much, and then they kick me off the list and all this kind of stuff. So these lists sort of run around, these sort of rumored lists. So this thing had gone. And so I've had this tape for maybe as long as 3 years. The tape was taped on February the 20th, 2017. That's right at the very beginning of the tape. And as I said, you can play this tape on your channel. I'll put it on mine. It's very hard to listen to because it's off a phone. And so when I got it, I gave it to some of the Young Gun guys. And then suddenly someone came to me and told me who it was. And I said, how did you know that? And they really didn't say, but then I found out that she had been referenced in a paper. It was in a footnote. Now, a lot of people don't read, but I saw this footnote. I go, oh, that's where they got it from. But I was so amazed. That's why I called these guys the Young Guns. I was so impressed that they'd figured out who this woman was on the tape. And Kit Green describes her as 95% accurate in terms of medical material, medical information that he's giving. Talked about that she may be better than Uri Geller. Just like unbelievable. And so when you hear this tape, when I got the tape from Ryan, the Young Guns told me who it was on the other end. And then Joe Mercia came and said he had the tape. And shortly after he got it, he put the transcript. Now he's saying now he transcribed it. But then I got another offer, and I think it came from the same source he had, but not directly, because I don't deal directly with these intelligence people. I always deal with people who are dealing with them. So somebody around one of these people said, oh, they've got this for you. Can you put it out? And I said, well, I've got this already. I mean, and I know how the person got it. And this time it came with the transcript. So the first time it had no transcript. So it had gone either to this guy at the White House, Ron Pandolfi. There was a couple of other people on the list, and someone had made a transcript. Now, if Joe Mercia said he did it, well, then he had the transcript. But when it came back to me the second time to put this thing out, which I didn't put out, it had the transcript with it. And it basically, when this Israeli story, I thought it was crazy. And then suddenly I realized, like, oh, that's on that tape. That's on that Kid Green tape where he's talking. I'll give you the quote because I'll play about a minute of it, but I'll play the part that fits in, that links into this idea. So the Israeli guy, the security guy for the space program, he's talking about the fact that there's communication between the highest levels of the American government and the aliens, which has been around for a long time. Frank Strange is in the 1950s was talking about it with the book called The Stranger at the Pentagon, where Valiant Thor was held at the Pentagon for a number of years. And Eisenhower, there's a story that Eisenhower dealt in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base. And that's this crazy story you always hear about the Greys, where Eisenhower makes this deal with the Greys. And, to exchange alien abduction people for technology, which is I always say to people, that's a total stupid story. That's not how it started. The story 2 weeks after that event happened, that came out in a UFO news group at that time in 1954 said that he had interacted with the Etherians, with ordinary human type beings. You got to remember, there were no grays in the 1950s. They were all human type beings from Mars and Venus, and they looked like us and stuff like that. That was the story that was put out in 1954. So the idea that Eisenhower dealt with grays is, number one, crazy, because there was no grays in the 1950s, and number two, why would you make a pact to exchange for abduction? Because, I mean, if the grays break the treaty, what are you going to do? Take them to court? You got to appear in court Monday morning, and the grays are going to go to court if you break the grays can do whatever they want. If they want to abduct people, they're going to abduct people. And why would the grays give the Americans technology, which was the Americans are going to turn around and try to shoot down the craft? I mean, it didn't make any sense. It made much more sense that they had gone. The original story was that these human type beings had interacted with Eisenhower, and they'd floated stuff over the table, levitated stuff on the table. And Eisenhower took a look and said, no, we cannot release this. And that's when the cover-up started in 1954. He said, no, the people aren't ready. And he shut it down. But it was basically, they said, we want you to shut the nuclear weapons down. That was always the message of the 1950s. Yeah. And so this has been around for an awful long time. And you get a lot of experiencers. You'll run into, or Bob Lazar said there was an alien at Area 51, that there was this contact. And that was a story that Bill Moore is putting out about EBE-1, EBE-2, EBE-3. And if you ever get an interview with Richard Doty, ask him about this, he'll get into the EBE-1, 2, and 3, and that they held them under near the Capitol, off the mall. There was a place where EBE-3 was, and Bill Moore was trying to get there with, they were trying to figure out, had that bird code that was telling them where the alien was being stored, this ambassador that was given. And by the time they got there, the alien had already left. So this story's been around, or you get a lot of experiencers who'll say, oh, I was with the council. They brought me in front of this council of all these different aliens, and I was there representing the Earth, and you hear all this sort of stuff. So the idea of the council is not new, but it's still kind of a wacky idea, and I've never really sort of bought into it. But then I suddenly realized that on this tape, where Kit Green is talking to this very high-level intuitive, it comes up, and here's what she says, and then we'll play the 1 minute of the tape, which people may not be able to understand, but again, they'll be able to play the tape if it's on your channel and my channel, play it over and over again, and they can listen to the whole 45-minute conversation. Yeah. And he's asking her, they're doing a reading, and she's talking about this portal off the coast of California, off of Catalina, and that's where the Nimitz happened. So she's talking about this portal under the water where the interdimensional base is, and she says there was a planned meeting between high-ranking civilian and military personnel and the others. And you realize that's what Tom DeLonge, that's what they all call them, the others. That's the name they use for him. She said between the personnel, military personnel, civilian, high-ranking civilian, military personnel, and the others, the watchers, the extraterrestrials, to give directions concerning geological stabilization. Now, the reason that's important is you go back to Francis Swan, 1954, and Kathy Martin brought it up today. Kathy Martin Shart, she worked on the same stuff that I worked on. So I said to her, good for you, Kathy. I send her the entire audio tape. I said, here you go. Good for you. You brought this up. What happened in 1954? There's an FBI document that talks about Francis Swan and this meeting at the where she's contacting these aliens and stuff like that, and that she's dealing with the Canadians. And in fact, the Canadians had AFA fly over they had a flying saucer observatory, and this memo, or this FBI, and it's also reproduced the same document with the U.S. Air Force, where they're going to fly over this flying saucer observatory in Canada on August the 1st, 1954, and it actually happens a week later, Saturday later, on August the 8th. And that's when the Canadians shut the program down, after this thing flies over there and they detect it and stuff. So I forgot. Oh, I know. So Francis Swan is in this memo, and in the memo it says AFA cannot come to the meeting. He's busy in the Pacific fixing fault lines. Now, the reason that's so important is in the 1950s, nobody knew about plate tectonics. I remember in the 1970s, I was at university, and I remember being in a course on this kind of stuff, and the professor was saying, oh, this is just theoretical, this idea that plates move around. So here you have in the 1950s, when nobody knew about plate tectonics, and you have this alien given this message that these plates they have to stop the shifting of these plates because there's going to be disaster, and AFA's fixing the plates. And this is exactly what this new thing that this intuitive is telling Kit Green, is that the aliens are again having this meeting with American officials about concerning geological stabilization, about these plates in the Pacific off the coast of California. And this is dramatic. It's identical story to the 1950s. So let me take over the screen, and then I'll play this 2-minute audio.
And what year did this, was the audio recorded? I know you just said it came out.
It happened on February the 20th, 2017. Okay, here's the audio. I'll just play the last minute of it. This is the part where it talks about the interaction between the government and the others.
The future potential event is a geologic destabilization in the area. I'll tell you more about it in a minute, but I'm going down and answering your questions. The second question you posed was how long was the event occurrence? The event took more than 2 hours, but the witness's memory is partially blocked, and the witness does not remember the entire event. Precipitated the event? That's your question. That's the third question. Oh no, excuse me. Was the cause of what occurred? My response is there was a planned meeting between high-ranking civilian and military personnel and the watchers, to give directions concerning geologic stabilization and civilian personnel.
Okay, so the tape is not that good, but what you're going to get is, if you go to Joe Merja's site, they have the transcript, so you can listen to the tape and watch the transcript at the time. So it's extremely important, because it seems to back up this story that this Israeli guy is talking about the fact that there has been this interaction between the government, high-level government people, and the aliens. So I asked everybody. Bob didn't have anything. The only thing I got was from Steve Mira, who runs Phenomena Magazine in the United Kingdom, who said this is not the first time this guy's brought this up. And he brought it up in a book that he wrote. So this Israeli guy has brought it up before, and they're trying to get an interview with the guy. And the key is that the Jerusalem Post carried the story, which means the Israelis are taking this seriously. They know who this guy is. And it's a fascinating story. And so that's why I thought we'd put this tape out. And you see on Facebook and on Twitter, it's sort of gone crazy. And people are sort of getting upset. It's sort of like, why don't you just release the whole story? And because I like to play the game, that people go on Twitter, they figure, the qualifications for going on Twitter is you've never read a book and you don't read anything. Just tell me the story and then I'll tell you why you're wrong. So I'm trying to force people to actually do some reading, to actually do some research, almost like the theory of wow, that the beings aren't giving you the whole thing. They give you little bits and pieces and they make you figure it out. So that's why I'm not putting the whole story out all at one time, but we will put the tape out. I think it's time the tape comes out. I think everybody's got the tape already, and a lot of people have been sitting on the tape. And because it has this very important part that talks about this interaction with the American government, I think it's time, because if it was just you and I, but the fact that Kit Green is on this tape, and you listen to the tape, Kit Green isn't going like, what kind of crazy story are you telling me? He's going, okay, right.
He's rolling with it like it's fact. So that's what I found lovely about the tape. And then what I like, the Israeli guy bringing this up now, I think if I'm remembering his most recent quotes correctly, he said 5 years ago, if I would have came out with this, it would have been lost in everything. Everybody would have thought I was just crazy. He said he has talked about it over the years, and he said why he's bringing it up again now is because obviously he's old and isn't going to be around too much longer. So it's kind of like that near deathbed, he doesn't give a crap confession. And then I like how he segued it into our leaving President Bush. He said this all came up again when he was going to disclose, and then this galactic federation swooped in and said, no, you better not.
Yeah,
Don't do it. So
that's the part I have my doubts about, that
right.
Donald Trump would keep this quiet, that he would, I can see the officials doing it, because if they are working, they've been working together for a long time. And
can you imagine that phone call? It's not the red one, like the nuke bomb test, like get down here. It's like the bright green phone, and they're like, Mr. President, it's AFA.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing is that I actually, I had released this tape before to a bunch of researchers, and I gave it to John Burroughs. He said, you don't have a tape with Kit Green, because he dealt with Kit Green. Kit Green dealt with Burroughs and with Peniston for their DNA and stuff like that.
I believe Burroughs gives Kit credit for helping him sort out his VA stuff that was going on.
Yeah, well, he got disability. That's what he wanted. That's what he got for disability. But when he went to Peniston and he said, I'll give you full disability if you provide us the DNA, that's when Peniston said, I'm in the bag. I don't care about your money. I don't need your money. And he basically said, I'm not going to roll over like Burroughs. What are you doing? And that's when he said to him, and this is this important part, he said, what are you doing? I want to know what you're doing. And then Kit Green says, well, it's propulsion. He said, bullshit, it's propulsion. Don't give me that. I'm not stupid. He goes after, and then he says, well, maybe I used the wrong word. Maybe it's not really propulsion. We're trying to figure out how do they pop in and how do they pop out just as quickly. Yeah. So Peniston didn't give it to him because Peniston didn't need the disability. Right. He said, I wasn't injured. I didn't want to do this kind of stuff. So what happened was when I announced to John Burroughs that I had the tape, he said, you don't have a tape of Kit talking to an intuitive? I said, yeah, I do. So I sent it to him, and then he immediately listens to the tape, and he phones up Kit Green. He says, I got this tape of you talking to an intuitive. And then Kit Green that's the way Kit Green is. He's very clear. He just said, the tape was leaked by the client. Legally, I can't talk about it. So he doesn't deny it. So a lot of people say, like you saw on Twitter or Facebook or something, people challenging me. How do you know you're not being taken for a ride or whatever? Because the tape's been around. Kit Green has admitted the tape is for real. Now you can interpret what the tape means or what, how accurate this woman is. That's what Joe brought up today, that just because she's 95% accurate on the medical doesn't mean she's accurate on the UFO stuff. But the point is that she's identified sort of as the person to go to, that she's the number one person. And there's a committee. That's what Peniston was told. He said, what are you doing? And he basically, Kit Green confirmed that there are 8 people working on a committee studying the experiencers, the DNA and all this kind of stuff. And that sounded like Bigelow was involved. And people got to remember that Kit Green is on all these different boards. He's on what they call the Tiger Committee. So they have these committees inside the Defense Department that are trying to find out what is technology going to look like 50 years from now. They're not stupid. They realize that if you can get this technology beyond the leading edge, so they have a committee. I think it's called the Tiger Committee. And apparently he's on this committee and on the Defense Science Board and all these different boards where they're trying to figure out the leading edge of science. And that's why Kit Green would be the guy that's involved, because he was the remote viewing control officer for the remote viewing program in the 1970s. He's been in this. He and Hal Puthoff, as I always point out, probably have the longest held top secret SCI clearances in the country. They've had them since at least like 1970. These are not low level guys. And Kit's just doing his job. He's got this thing for the Defense Department, and they're trying to figure out how do these make contact. The same as in the 1950s, they were dealing with Francis Swan. How are you making contact? What do you do? How do we do this? And can you teach one of our guys how to do it? It's the same story, is that people have to realize that intelligence they don't pull it out of the air. The CIA gets the intelligence from you and I. That's where they're getting it from. Otherwise, they don't know anything more than you and I. And that's why they, like, even when I talked to Betty Andreasen, they were talking about how the husband believed they were being monitored, their phones and their computers. And I said, well, has Betty got instructions on how the craft flies? He said, oh yeah, it's in her book. And I said, well, would you be surprised that they're trying to tap your computer and watch you? Of course they're going to do it. I would do it too. That's the whole point, is the experiences have got it. So that's that. There's a couple other things I wanted to sort of just quickly touch on. You and I are doing a thing on, let's mention, promote this thing we're going to do with artists. We put out this little thing about, and I've always believed this to be true, that people like Chris Bledsoe, for example. Chris Bledsoe had his experience, and he immediately went running to the art store to buy art supplies and canvases and started painting. The same as this Emily Trim from the aerial school. She had a second experience in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, many years after the aerial school incident. And at that point, she went out and started painting. And I had this thing that the beings are using painting. They're inspiring people to paint that have never painted before to get the message out. And so we put this thing on Facebook, and we just got inundated. We're going to do a couple of panels. We must have 3 dozen, maybe 4 dozen people who believe that they have been inspired by the beings to paint. So we're going to do, for people, we're going to do some panels. We're going to do some special interviews with people with the artwork. And I think that was pretty interesting, that it sort of confirmed a theory. We just sort of threw the theory out that these people would be out there, and they were piles of people. Just everybody wanted to be part of this project. So we're going to do that. And the other thing I wanted to mention before we shut down is this thing where people are asking me about, what are you going to put out? And a lot of people, they're just in this for entertainment. They're not really researchers. They just want the entertainment. It's like, just tell me the story, Grant. Quit goofing around with half stories and prompting us. And so I said, well, okay, I had the story, and I've had it for a number of years. I had the story, and Art Lundahl was involved with this as well. In 1960s, a guy, James McDonald, who was a top guy working on UFOs, was at the UN. He did a lot of stuff. He was good friends with Art Lundahl. He would go to Washington. They would have these conversations or whatever. And he was putting pressure on Art Lundahl to get a briefing, to get the president to do an investigation on UFOs. So what they did was, they said, to get McDonald off our back, they did a study, an eyes-only study on UFOs for President Johnson in the late 1960s. And Art Lundahl was behind that. So what they did is they did this eyes-only study. It was run by a guy by the name of Frank Rand. And the people that were on, it was called a task force. Surprise, surprise. What is it called now? The UAP task force. This was called a task force to do an investigation. And it's the same story. It's like you read it. It's the same thing. The people that were involved, like now you have Pandolfi. Then it was the guy on the committee then was Art Lundahl. They had Tom DeLonge was dealing with Robert Weiss, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. The head of Lockheed Skunk Works was on that task committee. Tom DeLonge had a 2-star general from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The task committee had a 4-star general from Wright-Patterson Air Force. It was the same thing. Tom DeLonge has a general from the National Reconnaissance Organization. The head of the National Reconnaissance Organization was on this task committee. And they put this, so they did this committee, and they did this study, an eyes-only study, so there are no documents. And they put it in front of Johnson. And basically what it said was, yes, UFOs exist. And beyond that, we really don't know anything. It was this idea. It's like, we really don't have any answers. We know UFOs exist. And so I put that out. I put the document out, and to show the conclusion. And it was a big yawn on Facebook. Nobody cared. It's like, oh, okay.
I saw that. I liked it. I was given the wow face. And it does show how many years later they're still saying, we know what it is. We know that it's something, but we don't know what it is. And so it's like, really?
And that, but that's what, but you got to remember, that's what you get from going to experiencers. That's what you get at the end of the Wilson document, where everybody disputes it. They say, oh, the contractor was lying because the contractor said we can't figure the thing out. That was the story in the 1980s. Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallee, and Kit Green sit down in a Denny's restaurant. It's a famous story. It's called the Core Story. They sit down and they say, okay, there's all this garbage floating around the UFO community. What do we know for sure? The conclusion they came was, number one, we are being visited by something. Number two, we've got technology. We've got crafts. We can't back engineer it. Same as Eric Davis, when he was putting down the whole story of Bob Lazar, he said the stuff isn't at Area 51. They shut the program down in 1889. It's this same story that keeps coming that says we have got no technology, but the only technology we have that I found. So I found the anti-gravity stuff always seemed to fall. It didn't seem to be there. Like they're talking about this piece that they're going to levitate this little layered piece. And I said, if they're working on levitating a piece of metal off the table, they ain't got anything, man. They ain't flying crafts around the space, around the solar system. There's no way. And so that's the whole idea. But when you look at the portal story, it always ends up, and that's what I said, that this is all this stuff that we're disputing now that people are talking about, this thing about Kid Green and the tape. It's in a book that I wrote like 6 months ago and I published about portals and UFOs at Mount Shasta. And I go into the tape, I go into all the stories about portals. And my estimation is now that if they have any technology, whatever, they have exactly what Kid Green talked to Peniston about. He said, we're trying to figure out how do they pop in and pop out just as quickly. They may have portal technology. They don't have anti-gravity. It doesn't work on anti-gravity. They're not flying with big, huge spaceships. They're popping in and they're popping out. And so I go through all the portal stuff I've got, and that's what this tape is about. She's talking about this portal off the coast of California, this interdimensional thing. And then that's what Kid Green says. Oh, I don't know anything about the interdimensional, whatever you call it, factories or whatever. I don't know that part. I just know the medical stuff. And he doesn't even blink an eye when she's talking about this interdimensional thing, that they're coming in through portals. And so every time you go to the portal story, it seems to fit that, yeah, there may be some sort of portal technology, and they have an understanding. Even I think I posted on today on Facebook, I posted the photograph that Tyler D, who's this famous NASA guy, the head NASA guy, shows me these photographs in 2013 at a cabin in Pennsylvania. And he says, what do you think of this? And he shows me this photograph of these two guys flying through space. I put it on Facebook today. And he just basically just said to me, he said, what do you think of this? And he showed me a bunch of other paintings that were in this building. And I had no idea. I had no interest, whatever. He said, do you know where that is? I said, no. Well, that's the Hughes Aircraft Building. I go, I still don't know what it is. He said, well, that's where the jump room was. And I went, what? That's a jump room? And they said, where's, and he said, the painting with the two guys flying through space is outside the elevator. And this is where the whole thing happens, supposed to happen in this elevator. And so then you start, years later, I'm thinking, oh, that's why he showed me the photographs. Maybe there's something to this. Maybe there's something to the portal thing. They understand this concept and they have it. So, and the whole portal thing, the jump room thing was they were going to Mars. And again, in this Israeli thing, they talk about this base on Mars. And so they may, the more I start to think about it, the more I'm thinking like, maybe this nonsense is all true. They have some truth to it and it's very highly classified. But in terms of anti-gravity, I've never seen anything that indicated that they had any sort of anti-gravity stuff.
Right. And you come across that in other people's theories too about anti-gravitic things, and if it is just this piece. But you're right, the portals keep coming back up and back up. And I think you and I, aside from this, we've been following just this last little bit for close to 8 months now. You know, what else is going to come out about portals? We even talked about doing a panel on portals. So
yeah. And I put this to like a lot, some of the portal stuff is coming out of the Pandolfi camp, and it seemed to back up. I mean, there was a couple things there.
I remember even you mentioned Jack Sarfati a few months ago. He made a post. Somebody asked him what all these orbs are. You know, Jack, if you know how to make a tic tac fly, what are all these orbs people are seeing? And he gave like a one-word answer: portals.
Wow, yeah.
And that was it. I took a screenshot of that because I'm like, check this one out. Sarfati saying portals.
Yeah, you have to send me that. I'll send it to, I'll stick it in the book because I've got all these. That's what I do is when you see these things, and that's why it's important. When you get someone like Sarfati who says it, nobody's going to pick it up. But if you're watching it, you go, oh, again? And it's like they're behind the scenes, they're talking about this kind of stuff. And or even like so when I had this Israeli story, that one of the things that I haven't got any response back, I sent it to two people who were dealing with Pandolfi, and I said, ask Ron about this Israeli guy. Like, oh, what's he got to say? Because sometimes he'll have a comment, sometimes he has a comment. Yeah. I never talked to him directly, but a lot of the stuff I think may fit out, and we're getting more dramatic stories all the times in terms of people, high-level guys talking about not just the fact that UFOs exist, but starting to talk about this really high-end stuff of what actually might be hidden. And this guy, whatever people say, if the Jerusalem Post ran this guy's story
Right.
about this guy, they know who this guy is. He's a pretty important guy. So let's hope that the British people get an interview. They're trying to get an interview with this guy.
Absolutely. And I want to throw in there, you know, if we can take these little blurbs from our own military within the United States, you know, I'm thinking of all the sources that Macmillan just had for his debrief article. And, you know, why would we not believe this Israeli guy? I mean, here we go, another military man, supposedly above par, excellent witness to anything, ran the space program. You know, I mean, this is a big deal to me. I mean, this is one of the highest people in Israeli government that could come out with this. So
And then on the United States side, you got Kit Green, who is as high as they come, telling basically the same story through this woman. So this may cause some, and so now we're going to go. I'll end it with this. We're going to play Joe Merja's tape. We did an interview with him a number of months ago. He's done some pretty important work. He's dug up some stuff. Sometimes, you know, you and I have some worries about who you're dealing with, that you can't. I guess my big disagreement with this is getting sworn to secrecy by people. That if you get sworn to secrecy, they've got you. I mean, you're done. And but other than that, he's broke some pretty big stories, and he's got some high level sources, and hopefully he can leak it out. And because that's the whole thing, you can talk to all the people and get the answers, but unless you get the material out, it really doesn't help.
just in time, we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Grant, and I'll get both of these posted ASAP.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Right.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.